people quitting their jobs, saying the employer, the managers do not value me. It is a culture of not understanding the true value of the human element of the workplace. That is what our book is all about. We are changing the paradigm, and we are calling it human capital, not resources, human capital. In this new world of work, all people leadership in the digital age is a paradigm shift proposition to start looking at your human element, your worker partners with value, not as expense, as cost, but as a value-adding element in the business.
All right, everybody, welcome to today's episode 5, The History of Human Capital Management. I wanted to introduce for the first time on our podcast our third and final co-author, Dr. Robert Ramirez. People that know him in person call him Dr. Bob, but Dr. Biswas, Dr. Bob, is also Dr. Bob, so it gets a little confusing for us. So he is Dr. Robert, and you may already know this, but what makes this book kind of unique and practicing what we preach, sort of, is that the three of us are good friends. We've done a lot of work on this book, but we've actually never met in person. And so if we knew Dr. Robert personally or were around him more, we might be more natural to call you Dr. Bob. But I think we get used to calling Dr. Biswas Dr. Bob. So what are names that people call you?
For me?
Yeah, what do people call you?
My students call me Dr. B.
Okay.
I keep it simple now, just Dr. B.
What do your enemies call you?
I don't know if you want to know that.
Just call you anything but late to dinner, right? Don't call me late for dinner.
That's right.
And you're in the Southern California area.
That's right. I'm in Southern California, actually Valencia, California. And I've been on vacation. I've been on a road trip for 5 weeks with my wife, traveling through the U.S. and Canada. So thank you for holding down the fort and kicking this off. And now I'm just happy to join the two of you and be on this podcast. We have so much information to share, so thank you.
We're so glad you're here because this topic, you're our expert, right? You're our in-house expert. No. Dr. Bob Biswas is our expert on the history of human capital management. Yes. In fact, I tried not to give him too much prep time for this because he could rattle it off the top of his head. So welcome everybody to today's episode. Let me throw this up. It is History of Human Capital Management. And it's going to be a brief history, but I'm sure Dr. Bob's got lots of great stories on this. So, Dr. Bob Biswas, what do you have to say to start us off with this topic?
Hey, to start it off, I have to tell you a story. I'm a storyteller. A few years ago, I was in Oxford University for a summer program for faculty members. And as part of that program, they took us on a trip to Ironsbridge. Ironsbridge is near Birmingham, England. So we went on a bus tour along with our tutor, who is a professor, who was his name. I forget his name on the top of my head, but he was the chief economic advisor to Tony Blair's government. So he was guiding us to Ironsbridge. Why is Ironsbridge famous? This is where the Industrial Revolution started. The first factories were built. Why was it that place the start? They've discovered a lot of iron ore in that place, iron ore deposits. So some enterprising young people, business people, extracted the iron ore and started smelting it to whatever the right word is, and to make iron ore into steel. And the first iron bridge was built there. That's why it's called Iron Bridge, and it still stands there. These early factories melting down iron ore into steel was the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, switching back to human capital, one of the professors from Oxford was the tour guide here, and he was explaining that the average lifespan of the worker in these factories was 19 years of age. Wow. Because the working conditions were so poor. There was no protections against airborne diseases, etc., in the factory, so they died. The owners themselves, because they were in the factories, their longevity wasn't that much better. They lived it to their 30s only. So there was no worker protection in the early years. And in the Industrial Revolution and factory jobs became very prevalent, lots of people came from rural areas to work in these primitive factories. This is how human resources started in the workplace, okay, with no protections. And then some enlightened industrialists during the turn of the century there decided they need to pay some attention to the workers. Henry Ford and all, who started the assembly line, they started saying we need to pay some attention to the welfare of workers. And they hired welfare officers who took care of the health of the workers, etc., and basic things, the basic needs of workers. The welfare officer took. So that's the progress from primitive iron bridge to Henry Ford's time. Didn't improve the lot much, the conditions of the working conditions. And therefore the workers around the Great Depression, right after the Great Depression, started thinking of organizing for their rights. And that was, the unions were born at that time. Walter Reuther started the AFL-CIO, and the unions started forming for demanding worker protections. Now, with the unions forming, again, enlightened industrialists decided they need to do much better with taking care of workers in their factories. So very seminal experiment was conducted by Elton Mayo from Harvard professor. It's called the Western Electric Studies, Hawthorne Studies, where human interaction in the workplace was studied in a scholarly fashion for the first time in the Elton Mayo Hawthorne Studies. And they found very interesting findings, like there was the great lighting experiment. They found that when they improved the lighting in the workplace, the worker productivity increased, but not only the workers who had improved lighting, their productivity increased, but workers who didn't have improved lighting also improved their productivity. Very strange human behavior observations, okay? And now we come to the 60s. The 60s in the Western world was, there was the birth of social consciousness in society, society consciousness. And then a seminal book was written called The Human Side of the Enterprise. What was the author? Douglas McGregor wrote that book. And for the first time, psychology or human behavior came into the equation. With that seminal book, I have a 25th anniversary copy here. It was really a very seminal book in how worker behavior, understanding psychology of the worker behavior in the workplace. That introduced new disciplines in HR, organizational behavior, organizational development, learning and development. All these functions started coming into HR. And up to that point, by the way, the human resource function was called personnel management, up to the late 60s, before Doug McGregor's book, okay? And then after that, the function started being called human resources. The human side of the enterprise, because that's what Douglas McGregor titled his book, and it became human resources. Up to the time to modern times, to the advent of supercomputers and technology, etc., we are in a new era of human resources. As I have said many times, human resources, although it understood human behavior and organizational behavior, etc., the idea was to manage the human resources within the organization. Manage the human resources, which was understanding the effectiveness and the efficiency of human resources within organizations. So it was an inside-out view of human resources. But in this era, going forward in the digital workplace, in the digitized workplace, human resources, humans in the human resources have completely changed their outlook into the world of work. And that has been accelerated tremendously by the Great Resignation, which was initiated right after the COVID-19 crisis started. The employees, because of the COVID-19 break, this had a chance to think about their work life as part of the human resource community. And they didn't see a pretty picture. Bosses were not as sympathetic, as empathetic, and people were working long hours, commuting long hours, and people started contemplating and becoming pensive about their work environment and said, this is not a good thing. We need to have a better work-life balance, okay? We need to focus on what is important to us. And a well-balanced life is more important to us. So employees started saying, enough is enough. Long hours, long commutes, and all this is enough. And the workplace has started changing dramatically. Actually, the employer contract that existed after from the 60s going forward has really now reached a stage where there is being re-engineered, I can say, re-engineered, because the employer-employee contract was what you call equilibrium theory, which is the employers brought into the work their knowledge, effort, abilities, and their time, etc. And they expected to receive from their employer commensurate rewards, work-life balance, career progress, etc. But that equilibrium became disequilibrium. So employees are taking hold, the employees are taking hold of their work life in this new digitized environment. So we have started looking at the human aspect, human side of the business from an outside-in view, not inside you. It's not efficiency and effectiveness. It's involved in engagement and satisfaction, job satisfaction, and mainly control of our work lives, okay? the time we spend and the work-life balance. So we have moved in the digital age, in the fourth revolution, to an outside in view of the human side of the enterprise, outside in view. And as it is, because of these many changes, the four forces we talk about in our book, the world of work has changed. That's why the title of our book, there's no more the traditional work life that our fathers and our forefathers and our grandfathers experienced. There's no lifetime employment anymore.
Yeah.
Workers want to work when they need to work, where they want to work, and what they want to work with. So that is basically, in summary, Bill, the history of human resources.
Yeah, as I was sitting there listening to you, thank you very much. That was a wonderful short version of what that is. And as I mentioned before, I come from the strategic management side of things, the business ownership mindset. And, I'm thinking if I was one of those entrepreneurs that found that iron at Iron Bridge, and man, I've got this great idea. I can produce so much more. I have all these tools, all these ways to do this. But in order to produce all this stuff, I can't do it all myself. Perhaps I can convince somebody to help me. And I think there's still in some business owners' mindset that if I pay somebody, that should be thanks enough, right? And so I'm paying you for your time. You're going to come help me. And guess what? If we make extra money, I may not give it to you. I may keep it for myself, or I may value my entrepreneurship differently. But what happened is that the business owners got so involved with productivity that they didn't realize that they were wearing out their most valuable asset, right? And even now you're seeing that some HR departments are doing that they view their people as a resource. And so that's one of the key things that you're trying to get us to think about as well, right?
Bill, I have oftentimes mentioned this, and in my previous books I've written about this. Since the advent of modern accountancy, the accountants look at the view of the human element in the business life differently. And I think that is a big problem with the accounting system. Why I say this? In accounting, people costs, the human costs, expenses, are all operating expenses. Everything. Salaries, benefits, training, development, recruiting costs, all immediate current expenses. They all go into the income statement. Whereas the equipment that the humans work with, physical equipment, computers, machines, they need the humans to operate these machines. Accountants think they are capital costs, not the humans. That is an inside-out view. How can I give an example in my book? I'm going to go and I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to start a biotech company to come up with a miracle cure for COVID-19. So I find out in the National Institutes of Health, there is this young scientist genius who I want to hire to be a chief technology officer of my company. So I go there, I interview him, I woo him, I dine him, I bring him to California where my company is going to be, and I take him around, show him around. Finally, he agrees to take my offer and start this venture and come up with a miracle cure of COVID. And he tells me during one of our meetings that I need to help him if I want him to join, he has to build. I have to build for him a lab, modern lab, which requires equipment. Okay, lots of equipment, fancy equipment. I said, how much will it cost? He says about $6 million. I said, okay, we'll get our investors to fund it, but you come along. All in accounting, all that equipment cost is capital expenditures, balance sheet expenditures. It has, their useful life is over a period of time. But all the expenses I have to expend for this scientist, recruiting him, travel expenses, his salary, his benefits, are current operating costs. Does that make sense to you? It doesn't make any sense. Human resources, the human element is the main capital of the organization. Well, it has much more useful life.
I think
it's even so bad. This scientist comes and joins you and he builds a fancy drug, and the company gets a patent on the drug. The cost of getting that patent, cost of paying the lawyers to get that patent, are capital expenditures. Every expenditure for the scientist, the human capital that created this product, is operating expenses. His value to the company is 1 year.
Yeah. Well, this
is the inside out view, Bob, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It is perpetuated by the accounting system.
I think when I think of capital, and Robert, I'm sure you've worked with P&Ls and things like this before. When you go to a capital expenditure, you're buying a piece of equipment with the intention that piece of equipment will create more value than it costs. Is that how it works, Robert?
That's correct, actually. But also the way taxes are done, you can write off that equipment over a period of years.
Exactly.
So you write off, you depreciate the value of that. I wanted to add another note, just another misconception about human resources, and that is you got to think about the management's job is that they hire a director of human resources to oversee the employees and to bring the best out of that staff, their skills and their talents. But they work for they're paid for the corporation. So when an employee has an issue, they take it to human resources thinking that HR is going to represent them. But they're really representing the corporation and the people that's paying them. So, and they want to make sure that there are no issues or contract liabilities, lawsuits put against the employer. So that's sometimes a misconception that people have, that HR is there for the employees. They are there to get the most out of the employees, but they are there to benefit the company and to make sure that the company doesn't get itself into trouble.
You make a great point,
Bill,
too.
In your comment to me, is that scientist my scientist?
Right.
Is that person adding value or not?
Well, I was just going to make that jump to that, is that we view capital as things that we would buy that over time will have more productivity, right? The output will exceed the input. So I'm going to get more value added to the organization when I buy that piece of equipment. What's weird is that we don't think of people that way. We think of people as wages, as costs, what you're saying, that they just keep costing me money. They're never going to actually create the value that will supersede the cost that they cost me, right? And so we're seeing tons of people choosing automation because they don't value see the value that people are adding to the organization.
But clearly, the scientist is the principal source of value.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is the principal source of value, but the system which thinks inside out is looking at them as a cost, as no value. 1 year value is 1 year only. I used to work for one big accounting firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I used to challenge my accounting friends. I was in the financial advisory group about this issue, and they all would agree with me, but they say, Bob, we cannot really take the human capital and put him in the balance sheet, capitalize it over a useful period of time. I used to tell him, wait a minute, the equipment depreciate. Human beings appreciate. So it will increase your balance sheet.
Well, there is a time at which they do account for it, Dr. Bob. Maybe not the accounting department, but the business owner, when he gets ready to sell it or go IPO, all of a sudden, those people are worth something. Is that right?
Exactly.
They start to go, you know what? If I was to buy your COVID-19
that adds to the intrinsic value, right?
Right.
We're talking about the intrinsic value.
Because if I say I'm going to buy that company you just started, fictitious company you started up, and now I say I want to buy that off of you, and I say what's it worth, and you say, well, it's worth $10 billion, and I say, well, the lab only cost you $4 or $5 million to make, and he's like, yeah, but go find the scientist, go see how you can get your own scientist.
Exactly.
Then.
Right. Every employee has to think about how do they add value. So as you prove yourself to a company, you've got to talk about the value that you add to the department, to the company, because you are an asset.
Bob, this view, this angle, this viewpoint, employers have behind their minds about the value of the human element of the business, which is the cost, limited value. I have discussed with accountants that they tell me, Bob, it's very difficult to measure the value of Bob Ramirez, because I can measure the value of the cost of acquisition of the equipment, but I cannot value in a very logical manner the value of Bob Ramirez. I said, that's wrong. I have formulas that you can use to value Bob Ramirez. Okay? You have to take the effort. This concept of human resources not having value in the language of business, accounting, and finance, not having value, has led to the current trend of the Great Resignation, because employees in companies have realized, I am not being valued. That is why we've had the Great Resignation, masses of people quitting their jobs, saying the employer, the managers do not value me. It is a culture of not understanding the true value of the human element of the workplace. That is what our book is all about. We are changing the paradigm, and we are calling it human capital, not resources. Human capital. In this new world of work, all people leadership in the digital age is a paradigm shift proposition to start looking at your human element, your worker partners with value, not as expense, as cost, but as a value-adding element in the business.
Yeah, and we see that the
mindset change needs to be changed.
The employees have access to all this stuff, right? They have they can get large amounts of data. They have these technologies. They have a supercomputer in their hand, and so if we don't value our employees, they're going to leave. They're already thinking about it, right? So all they need is a reason to leave. And that happens often.
And if you want to get the most value of your employees, don't micromanage them. Let them be creative. Give them access to all the information that you have, and don't micromanage.
Both of you know there's a survey called the Great Places to Work. It's found a lot of traction.
Yes.
Great places to work. The companies that are listed as great places have realized that the human element is the real value of the organization. Okay.
Yes.
Automation without the human element doesn't work. Okay. So now we are in an era where, in a knowledge economy and more knowledge economy, in the digital economy, knowledge is very important. We are in a knowledge society. So the human element who have this knowledge is demanding their value. So that is where the people specialists have to focus or change their paradigm too, in this new era, in the new era of the new world of work.
Yeah, so some closing
That's thoughts. Where we've arrived in the journey in history, right?
Yep. So some closing thoughts is, this is something you asked me to put up, that human resource departments need to constantly analyze their competencies. I initially had analyzed their systems, because that's what I understand HR departments is, they have systems that are set up. You asked me to use the word competencies. What did you mean by that?
I think, well, number one, in order to make the argument that I made here about considering, in the language of business, accounting, and finance, explaining to senior leadership the value of the human element, has to be done in the language of business. So one of my primary suggestions to the human resource communities is to learn the language of business, so that you can explain to your leadership in dollars and cents why the human element has to be valued much more. Not only from a sociology, psychology, and well-being perspective, but also from the dollars and cents perspective. In order to communicate that, human resource people specialists, I call them, need to also be very fluent in the language of business. And that is one of the competencies that they have to develop. And continuously, another competency that you brought up, the people specialists in the company have to learn how to become true advocates for I don't like to use the word employees anymore. Working partners, okay? True value of the working partners. They really have to be the advocate, not just for management, but also truly for the human capital element in the business. And also risks their jobs to represent the value of the human element. If the senior leadership doesn't listen, you say, okay, this is the way the employees feel. I am representing the employees' point of view. If you don't want to listen, I'll go somewhere else where they will listen.
Yeah.
They have to be bold. They have to develop advanced business competencies and develop and be bold.
Robert, what do you think about that bottom statement there?
Well, if I could add to that, you were talking about knowledge, and knowledge is power, but knowledge is basically just information. We can get that information from a textbook, or we can Google that, but it's human. It's the human capital that we're able to take that information and have wisdom, which is knowing how to properly apply that information. So wisdom is what we want for our staff and employees, to give them that creativity to take that skill set that they have. So as we try to have our people leadership get the most out of their employees, we want to teach them that we want their wisdom, and through that they're going to add value.
Our book is looking at the human side, the human element in the business as a value-adding capital.
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore, we present in the book different ideas of how the people specialists, people leadership have to change their paradigm in this new digitized knowledge world. Truly change their paradigm. Start with looking at the human element from the outside in and not from cost management and effectiveness, efficiency, inside out viewpoint. Okay. That is a paradigm shifting book, and we lay out a game plan. We present a model in the book, which is called the human capital management. What do you call it? Human capital lifestyle management. Okay. Model that looks at the human element from the outside in. So.
Yep, that is in our, I believe it's chapter 16, Human Asset Life Cycle Model, home, about taking that look. And you were mentioning talking the language of business. As a business owner, I should be very much value this approach, because what you're offering here is the suggestion that ultimately, if my working partners are more appreciated, more valued, they will actually add more increased value to the productivity of the organization. It's not just our people will enjoy to work here, but it's going to go to the bottom line as well. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you, Dr. Bob, once again, and Dr. Robert. Thank you.
So next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.